Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name again is Ricky Coghlan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'd like to echo Andrew's acknowledgement that we are gathered here today on the land of the Gadigal people, the unceded country of the Gadigal people, and offer my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For those who might be vision impaired, I'm around about 5'6" or 160 odd centimetres high. I'm wearing plaits with a little bit of silver in there, and a black and white dress. I'm in my mid-60s now. I guess when we talk about sport and when we talk about inclusion and coming up against the barriers of transgender inclusion in sport, I reflect back to my own story, and I like to tell it in this way because it's a story about when sport got it right, and it's a story about leadership, and it's a story about visibility. And I guess it begins as a kid. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, which was an era when there was no visibility really of trans people, and pretty much what we saw in the media would have been like, if you were around then you would realise that it was mostly about comedy, and transgender people were considered a source of comedy, and definitely folk who should not be around small children. So we were pushed very much to the margins of society. I found myself around about the age of 15 or 16 being sent off to a hospital here in Sydney for conversion therapy. And so even in the medical community at that time, conversion therapy was considered an option because we were understood to be people who had some kind of delusion or some kind of intellectual issues or going on. And so it wasn't until I was age 21, which was the age in which you could seek any kind of medical interventions or help, that I transitioned. So that was in 1980. Following that, I went on to get a career in the fitness industry and found myself managing gyms, training aerobics instructors, and it was a great time for me. So I was in my 20s, I was living a great life in the 1980s, which was a very positive time. We were starting to see the emergence of the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras being regular or televised each year. And we were starting to see a bit of an emergence of a nation that was awakening to the idea that we might be more diverse in the future or more inclusive. And around about this time, I found myself getting into a lot of running, and I bumped into some people who were running in a competitive way and found myself in an athletics club, and it just flowed on, and I didn't think about it a whole lot before I found myself running regularly at Interclub, running in state competitions, and I won some minor state cross-country races, and found myself having a great time competing each week, enjoying the other athletes' company that I was competing with on the weekends, and training in a great squad. So I was living this great life when I noticed there was a small column on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald one day saying that someone who had undergone a sex change was competing in women's athletics. So I realised that there was probably not a lot of transgender people competing in Sydney athletics at the time. So I called the Office of Athletics New South Wales, and they asked me to come in. And the very first thing that they did was apologise for the fact that this had got out to the media at all. My name hadn't been mentioned at this time. And then they said the words I've never forgotten, which was, athletics is a sport for everyone, and there is a place in this sport for you. Now, this was 1991. This was about October 1991. So that was very unexpected for me. And they then asked me to participate in some studies or to examine me, find out actually what we were dealing with, because at this time this was still very much unknown. We were living in an era when there wasn't even still much language to describe the experience of transgender people or to understand us in our sport itself. So I agreed to that. I thought it was a great idea. And so we underwent this, a couple of, 18 months to 2 years of, research on me. Meanwhile, in December 1991, I got outed at Sydney Athletics Field when a person turned up with a petition to have me thrown out of the sport, and Channel 7 Media. So now, that night I featured on the Channel 7 News. I actually headlined on the news, and the next day I was on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, and I think we might be going to see that on the screen in a moment. No, the next one maybe? No, and the next one. There we are. So I go out with my squad on the Sunday morning for our Sunday run, and then turn up at Bondi to have some brunch with some of the folk I've been running with in the morning. I'm walking up the road and on Campbell Parade, and there's a gentleman in front of a newsagent's, and he's holding the paper, looking at me in my running kit, and he said, "That's you, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." And I'm thinking like I'm going to be completely destroyed. I'm thinking my life is going to be, all over. I'll lose all my friends, I'll lose my job, I'll become an object of ridicule and contempt. But this gentleman said, "Wait here with my kids," and ran into the newsagents, came back out with a felt tip pen and said, "Sign this." So I signed it, and there was more people standing around, and I wound up signing theirs as well. And then I'm walking up Campbell Parade, and everyone is saying, "Oh, go Ricky," and good on you, Ricky, and the thumbs up. And then someone wanted to pay for my meal in the restaurant or in the cafe. And this set the tone for the rest of for the next 3 years of my life, of people shaking hands, signing autographs, going to schools, doing puff pieces on TV. I did every TV show you could imagine, and featured on magazine covers. We've already seen a little bit of that. We might see a bit more if I can advance this on. It doesn't, wait on, I think we've got to go back. There we are, yes, so even on magazine covers. And you can see the magazine cover tells a little bit of the story, the language of the day. Apparently some people thought I had some manpower when I was running. And I think that does tell us a lot about the time. But it also, there's a little bit of a story, I guess, that even I was on the cover of a magazine. So this was breaking a little bit of ground, and it probably tells us a little bit about the times. And all of this grew out of the messages that kept coming from Athletics Australia whenever the media approached them. And they were always positive, and that hearing this positive message from people in a leadership position was reminding people of our aspirations as a nation, what kind of society we want. Do we want a fair go society? Do we want a society where we're all in this together, and a society built on mateship, inclusion, and respecting diversity and the individual? And I think all of these things do tie in to any conversation about any LGBTQI plus people that are, like in our community, that when we have people in that leadership role, and when we have a community that is devoted to the individual as much as an inclusive, welcoming role, which we are, and we are the nation of the fair go and mateship. And I think that all of that produces a kind of outcome for the experience I had. 2 years after this all broke, I got a letter from Athletics Australia saying you're quite welcome to continue to compete as you always have in the women's competition, and that's the end of the matter. if I wanted to compete overseas, I would have to go and approach the international body, but that wasn't going to happen. I was like a state level runner. And so, yeah, I guess that in conclusion, I can see that I'm going to have to wrap up here, that I would just say that in sport, and especially with the organisation that I do some work for here, which is Pride in Sport Australia, that they are doing a fabulous job in going out and talking to people at the head of sport. So the chief sports administrators, and bringing together policies of inclusion. And Australia leads the world in this space, and we should be proud of that. And whether you're part of the rainbow community or whether you're part of the wider community, we should be proud that we've been able to develop a culture where we can come together and we can have respect and inclusion. And so that when we have an organisation like Pride in Sport meeting with those leaders, it becomes a natural fit that we will go down that road. There are around about, and Andrew might be able to correct me later on when we're sitting in a panel, but we've got round about 20 or more sports in Australia where they have policies for trans inclusion in community sport, and I think that's to be applauded. So thank you very much, everyone, and I guess we'll move on to the next speaker.